Leaving Florida. I hated to leave Florida. It was there that I was truly an adult for the first time, or it felt that way anyway by comparison. Always before I was in the sway of something. College, New York, the group I lived with. But here was the first place that felt like a home. The dark and cold up north sent me into a spin. So every year by January, I was holed up in bed with a seed catalog, refusing to get up. When I came down ahead of the family to get set up, I lived outside at the end of a sand road that was rutted and potholed. It was straight and during the day fairly easy to steer around the potholes and keep away from the middle where the soft sand was. At night, it was completely black and you could only see, oh darn, uh, you could only see the woods and field out of the corner of your eye. It was smooth as a field of snow. Never a pothole, never plowing into the center. I don't know how, but night after night when I came home from work, it was the same. And later, we lived on a little lake, and in the early morning, I would take the baby out so he wouldn't wake the others and put him in the bow of a rowboat, and out we'd paddle some days greeting the dawn in wide-eyed, captured by the rocking. So when I left in the middle of the night, everything I owned, an enormous trunk to take the bus up north, it was with a heavy heart. The bus was stopped by the side of the road a few blocks away by the gas station at the crossroads in the tiny town where we lived. Since I couldn't carry the truck, I determined to make a frame, a long T with a crossbar for a handle, and drag it that way. Once the trunk was on, I looked like an itinerant penitente dragging a cross behind him. It started out fine uh, on the first part, the sand road that led up to the highway. Even if the trunk felt much heavier than I expected, I really had to lean into it. I had to laugh. It was beginning to look biblical with the cross and the torch of progress. When I got to the road, it was all I could do to move at all. I was worried about getting up to the crossroad in time. Then something let go, and it was suddenly easier. I stopped and looked back. There was a line gouged in the road where I had been. Somehow, I hadn't noticed that the nail went all the way through and then some, leaving a ridiculous symbolic spike like the claw of a cartoon cat raking great tears in a rug to keep from being dragged off somewhere. We backtrack now to the time when we were all together, David and Carlton, who were Nick's play uncles and our hosts of sorts. David, who had to have the Rolling Stones playing continually, I mean all the time, when he was awake. That is, until the night he mistook the lid of the record player for the toilet lid, and with a terrific buzzing sound retired the record player for two blissful months until the day a guest idly reached over and turned it back on, not knowing its history, now dried out. And sweet Carlton, the 13th and last child that Leroy took in as a foster child, we all lived together, Sidney, myself, and two boys, and David and Carlton, in a tiny cabin like elves under a gorse bush, only to scale. So it was in a world within a world under a giant live oak tree. David and Carlton and I all worked for or with Leroy building docks on the lakes. It was like being on a very nice chain gang or work detail. because Leroy would call out every step of the operation from his position in the water, oftentimes just his head visible like some great muskrat. There, son, put your nail higher. There, that's it. You basically didn't have to think at all. Very nice on the mornings we were sweating out last night's beer. And then I was completely alone, sitting up north, cooking outside on a fire, the electricity off, fetching water, and drawing every night for Eli, sending him pictures of everything so his mother could teach him sign language. People from Finhorn came through town. Finhorn, where they were quite into divas and nature spirits and grew huge outside vegetables with the help of the same. People asked them, what kind of fertilizer did you use? 10, 10, 20? All this was new to me. A friend leaving town asked me to return a book to the library. It was about dowsing. I found out I could do it. That was weird enough. Just seeing every place I put a sculpture of the garden was a center, and all the paths were on path lines. Path lines make the stick go up, but nevertheless, it's a stick, and it goes up in the same place every time. It's visible, not a diva or a sprite or any other rank and file of spirit folk. I'll get you in a minute. I quit my regular job, house painting, and tried to get by economizing and doing odd jobs. And a couple of days a week working at a gentleman's cattle ranch right outside town. It was owned by a retired Air Force colonel who we never saw, so he had the run of the place and grew immense marijuana plants back where the property gave on to a swamp. We would go out to find the quote lost cattle and water them. It was there dragging the pasture with a piece of chain fence to break up the cow patties that I first noticed that the reflection in the pond, the reflections were not simply the view of the far side turned upside down, they were the view you would have halfway to there and at the level of the water. So when you would look up under the skirt of the live oaks in the reflection while you looked at them from the side in the straight view. A minor thing, but it had escaped me. It was there that Tommy killed a corn snake. I wasn't sure why, since it was harmless, coiling and puffing itself up till its scales stuck out, and then rubbing them together to sound like a rattlesnake. And there that Amos, who had been weaned right and was kept in the barn separately so he wouldn't go out and suckle the entire herd dry, where Amos took a sudden exception to being moved to another stall, which is to say, an exception to being whacked with a 2x4, and where he turned and charged Tommy, catching him square in the chest so his teeth flew out of his mouth, his hat shot upward, and glasses also made a trip. Then Amos turned to me. I ran so fast it looked like the earth had turned to the side so I could run full tilt straight under the gate to get out of there. Tommy nearly got killed, and except for being part of the stall that gave instead of by a post, he would have. 2 days later, I was holding a can of grain to lure Amos into a trailer out of there. That's when we killed his corn snake to expedite that. To want Amos to get upset. So it was during this time when I was frankly quite hungry. Sometimes I walked out to an acquaintance's house to mow the lawn. He didn't take the hint that I needed something to eat right away. So halfway through mowing the lawn, I was lightheaded. I stopped for a moment. I like those climactic moments in a movie when the soundtrack goes still. Began to see a many-colored mist moving through the air. It was bursting out of plants like steam from a cooked pea on the end of a fork, bigger and gradier and more colors, twinkling blue and red mostly, some green and purple, and all at the threshold like the fusion of things you see skipping around when you stare at the ceiling or the empty sky. Against the sky, whole trees were bursting forth whatever this was, magnetism, life, and there was a background field of it, too, that moved right through the large trees undisturbed. In the shade, a bush was busy with small ports of light, no bigger than moths, shaped like a vortex that swooped up to a specific place on the bush, busied around as if tending it in some way, and then swooshed off. There were perhaps 20 at a time, coming and going like the action in a beehive. I knew the Fedor people were sincere, but had reserved some skepticism nonetheless. But now what? I'd only had one vision in my life, and that was when I was a child. I think I was 7 or 8, when out of nowhere, down at the end of my vegetable patch, where I had a fork and was in the process, never finished, of digging an underground lair, there was a there was a rotting stump, and overlaid on it was a soft, shimmering, highly detailed vision, a presence, really, of Saul on his throne and David sitting on the ground beside him. Even then, I would have thought it was an imagining from my storybooks, except that it was markedly different. Although I hadn't worked out the specifics then or where the focus was, I knew a kind of all over sexual feeling. Or to put it another way, I knew what flirting was, and it didn't go on openly in church. In fact, there was none of that kind of zest in church. Church was about getting a lofty drag going, the word joy said on a falling cadence, as if to suggest loss and leave taking. Saul looked forbidding, grumpy, but David, I remember the skin of his bare arm almost golden, and with a sheen like it would get in hot, humid weather. He looked right at me for a moment, delighted, inviting, very alive and alive to himself. It didn't last very long, but it was confronting, like a true meeting. I was a talisman always through the rest of the slog and loneliness of the Catholic story. The end.